bless this teaching. Come on, Sister Katie.
Can I share a little bit about the monies? Okay, a couple weeks ago, they took up an offering for me and my sister Carol and Maria because our van had been broke for about a month. And the reason I want to share it is we got blessed by the offering because we were able to get another vehicle. And it's better. The other vehicle, for me to go get my grandkids, round trip would be $80, and this new vehicle, it's $30. So that's huge blessing. But what was cool was in the process of me getting the paperwork done, going out to the driver's license place, I had to go like 3 trips because I kept forgetting stuff. So the last time I was there, I dropped a $20 bill on the floor and I didn't know it. And so when I got back, there was this young man that had waited on me, and he goes, "Oh, you just missed him." And I go, "Who?" He said, "Somebody from Full Gospel was in here." And I go, "Really?" And he goes, "Yeah, they were here to get plates for the van." I go, "I bet it was my pastor." And he says, "I don't know, but he found this on the floor." And he says, "You're lucky because most people would not have given this back." And so I said, "Well, that's cool." But I said, "Let me tell you a bigger miracle." I said, "My church took up an offering, so I'm able to even get the title and the plates and the insurance and everything." So what was cool was, and that is cool, but this guy, he goes, "You're kidding me." He got so excited that, he started almost shouting, and he goes, "Did you hear that? Did you hear about this miracle?" He goes, "Isn't God good? He is so good." And he got so excited. He said, "You make sure and tell your pastor." He said, "God is so good." I just thought it was cool. Here he was kind of preaching there to all the workers, and they go, "Yeah, we heard." But he was really excited. So that was cool, and I wanted you guys to know, because that was just a cool blessing, how God not only blessed us, but blessed somebody else with it too. Okay, over a year ago, God laid on my heart to study on, he just said study on covenant. So I thought, okay, I'll do that. And then when I got studying, I had no idea how in-depth it was. But he said, "I'd like you to share it." And I said, "Well, you know what, God? If you open up the door, I'll do it," because I doubt if he was going to open up a door for me. But he did. And the thing is, I so enjoyed, this was such a fun study. And every time I've studied it again, I always learn a little more that I didn't know before. Okay, to begin with, I just want God to bless it so you guys aren't bored with this teaching, because it is an exciting teaching. And to begin with, the word covenant appears in the King James Version 292 times. It depends on which version of the Bible you have on how many times it'll appear, but point being is it's often in the Bible. God really likes covenants. The term covenant applies to a transaction between God and man and his fellow man. Some compare it to a contract or marriage vows. Like when you get married, you exchange names and rings. You change your name and you get the rings. That would be considered cutting a covenant, actually. And actually, when you do get married, you're cutting a covenant between you, your mate, and God. A lot of people don't look at it that way, though. But anyway, the definition of covenant is an agreement, a contract, an undertaking, a commitment, guarantee, warrant, a pledge, a promise, a bond, a pact, or a deal. God alone sets up the terms of the covenant, and a covenant always requires a personal response. The term Book of Covenants is listed 4 times in the Bible. It's in 2 Chronicles, and in this particular scripture, the king gathered all the people, and I believe it was King Josiah, I want to say. But he gathered all the people, and he read them all the Book of the Covenant, and after words had been read, the king and everyone present committed themselves to walk before the Lord and keep his commandments, and what they did was they cut a covenant. The whole group, the whole city, the area did. There are several different covenants mentioned in the Bible, and I'm going to go over a few of them, but this is not a complete list, believe me. The first covenant would be with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And God gave them a wonderful place to live, and they got direct fellowship with God. And that would have been amazing. And in return for this gift, Adam and Eve were to take care of the garden, and the only thing they couldn't do was eat of one particular tree. And when you know that's what, it's just like when you tell your kids you can do anything but this, they always want to do what they're not supposed to. So they did what they weren't supposed to, and because of that, the covenant was broken, and God no longer allowed them to live and eat, and he threw them out. The next covenant we're going to talk about is the covenant with Noah. And it's listed in Genesis chapter 9 and Jeremiah 33:20. This covenant with God and Noah promised that judgment would not come again in the form of a flood. And also that we would have the reoccurrence of seasons and of night and day would not cease. And you know, sometimes I don't like winter. My favorite season is summer. I wish we just had summer all the time. But my husband always told me, he said, God gave us all 4 seasons for a reason, and you need to learn to appreciate each one. And when I read this, it helped me to understand God did this for a reason. So it's one of his signs to us of his covenant with us. God also said that a rainbow would be visible when it rains as a sign that God keeps his promise. And what I like is that sign isn't just for Christians, it's for everybody. You know, when there's a rainbow, it's God saying hi to everybody, and I'm here and I'm remembering. The next one we're going to talk about is the covenant of salt. In Numbers, they have it, and then in Chronicles, it says that salt had the power to strengthen food, keep it from decaying. It symbolizes the unbending truthfulness, that self-surrender to the Lord embodied in the sacrifice. And that way, all the impurities and hypocrisies were repelled. And that salt was used in all the offerings. That's in Leviticus. I mentioned that because I hadn't caught that fact before. I've added a few facts since the last time I did it. And I've been surprised, but I did not know that salt was used in all the offerings. And, you know, it did say in my study that salt is compared to Christians. You know how it talks about we're the salt of the earth. And salt was valuable. Back in Bible times, it was a way of payment even. Okay, the next one is the covenant of Abram, his name was later changed to Abraham. The conditions of this covenant were that Abram was to leave his country, his kindred, his father's house, and follow the Lord. Abram was 75 years old when he left. Now, when I read this, I thought, how hard would it be if God asked you to do the same thing? I mean, we think, oh, God wouldn't do that, but think if he did. 75 and having to start over, basically. That would be hard. This covenant had a 4-fold blessing. There was the increase of his numerous people, his descendants, material and spiritual blessings, exaltation of Abraham's name, and Abraham was not only to be blessed by God, but to be a blessing to others, and that was through the coming of the Messiah through his descendants. Later, this covenant was renewed, and Abraham was promised a son. About 14 years after the covenant was established, it was renewed, and a name change, and that's when he went from Abram to Abraham, obviously. And the establishment of the circumcision was a sign of accepting and ratifying that covenant. The next one we're going to talk about is the covenant with Israel. It took place at Sinai when the people had made known their acceptance to the words of the covenant found in the 10 Commandments. And they promised to keep the same. Their obedience to the commandments of the law was to be rewarded by God's constant care of Israel, their temporal prosperity, victory over their enemies, and the pouring out of his Spirit. But I want you to remember that after some of them didn't keep it very long, if you recall. But anyway, the seal of the covenant was the circumcision, and it was called Jehovah's Covenant. It was renewed at different times and periods of Jewish history. The entire book of Deuteronomy describes a particular covenant renewal ceremony that took place at critical points in Israel's history. The Sinai covenant was renewed just before Moses' death, before the transition of leadership to Joshua, and before major military campaigns to possess the promised land. Okay, now we're going to begin to talk to different areas, and I have some props pretty soon you'll be seeing, but a few things we want to cover first. These are like foundational scriptures on why we have about covenants. Ephesians 2:12 and 13. That at the time you were without Christ, being aliens from the commonwealth of Israel and strangers from the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. But now in Christ Jesus, you who sometimes were far off are made nigh by the blood of Christ. And in 1 Samuel 18:1-3, and it came to pass when he had made an end of speaking unto Saul, that the soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And Saul took him that day, and would let him no more home to his father's house. Then Jonathan and David made a covenant because he loved him as his own soul. And then in 2 Samuel chapter 9, the whole chapter is about David trying to bless, and I don't know, I'm not good at saying this word, Mephibosheth. And because he so wanted to keep that covenant going. In Genesis 15:9, and he said to him, take me a heifer of 3 years old, and a she-goat of 3 years old, and a ram of 3 years, and a turtle dove, and a pigeon. And I got to think, you know how hard today, if we had to come up with something like that for us to do, how complicated that would be? This is Abram gathering the sacrifice to cut a covenant with God. The material for the sin offering was regulated partly by the position of the one in whose behalf it was offered, and partly by the nature of the offense for which the atonement was to be made. In other words, if it would depend on they have so many different offerings, and I have a list of them I'm going to share tonight. But God made allowance, like if you were a poor widow and you didn't have much, you could give a flour offering. Or, there were different ways that God God always made allowances for everybody. Not everybody could afford to go have a lamb, get a lamb sacrifice. Because I was reading up on the amounts, like compared to today, and it would have been so much money just for a lamb. Okay. We're going to go over examples of some offerings and sacrifices. The first ones we have up are the blood sacrifice, the burnt offerings, general offerings, and baked offerings. And some of these I didn't know about. The next was fried offerings. Fried offerings, red heifer offerings, the Day of Atonement, peace offerings, showbread offerings, daily offerings, sin offerings, trespass offerings, Sabbath offerings, monthly offerings, yearly offerings, guilt drink offerings. They had it covered. I had no idea until I studied this how many, and I'm sure there's not even a complete list, but it's like, oh my gosh, so many, just so many. They were the sin offerings, guilt offerings, money offerings, even peace offerings. They had a scribe that would write down, and he would write down what was sacrificed and who the sacrifice was for. They kept good books to be credited for what they had. And I didn't know that until I studied this. Judgment and atonement were carried out through the transfer of sin of the people to the sacrifice, be it animal, grain, or burnt offering. Okay, and now we are going to show a picture of a money box. If they have it up. Is it okay? They said, okay. The money box, if no animal plant was used, then money was given. The money boxes were located in the outer court of the temple. It was also called the treasury area. And there were 13 different boxes, and they would put in temple dues, past dues, offerings, and they would even take up offerings for various supplies for the cost of running the temple. Now, covenant by blood has been recorded in all organizations, and the total giving of oneself to another has been happening forever. And in days gone by, when families cut covenants, they base them on the strengths and weaknesses, not on things in common, which is what we usually do nowadays when we get married to someone. We try and find someone who has common likes like we do. A covenant was never entered into lightly because it would last 8 generations. And the thing is, once you took and you cut a covenant, there was no way out without dying. And when I studied this, I thought, wow, if they applied that to marriages nowadays, it would sure change things. Because nowadays we don't look at marriage like that. Well, if it doesn't work out, we'll just get a divorce. But that's not what God intended. He intended you to enter it seriously. Think about it before you did it. Blood is thicker than water, and this is the one. The cutting covenant was more binding than having the same mother, and that's deep. I mean, that would be very deep. Okay, a covenant was forever, whether you got along or not, and you can't help born kin are, but you can choose who your blood brothers are. In other words, who you cut a covenant with. Okay, we're going to go through the steps of a covenant. And the first thing that they would do in cutting a covenant is pick, it would be tribes, be it families, cutting a covenant. They would pick a representative. And so tonight we're going to use TJ and Darvez to be our representatives. Okay. Yeah, you guys get that. And the representative would sum up who the whole tribe was. Okay, you guys can come up here and just both take a seat. And I will tell you when I want you to do what I want you to do. Okay, a covenant site would have been chosen. Okay. Did he get that? So do you need this? Okay. Got it? What else? Okay, I forgot. Go ahead. That's right. Yeah. They have to have weapons for later on here. Yeah, it's going to get interesting. Okay. Now, hold on one second here. I missed my place. Okay. When they would they would pick a covenant site, and it was where all the parties could see it. It was never done in secret. So I'm sure this would have been a major event, and everybody would have gathered to watch it. And they would select an animal, and the animal had to be with no impurities. It had to be, like spotless and in very good condition. Now, there's different type of covenants. The covenant that we're going to attempt to teach you about tonight is a blood covenant. And it was cut different than other covenants. When they did a blood covenant, the animal would be parted down the backbone. And they did not always do that in the other ones. I have some pictures that'll help with that. It was made to fall opposite each other to create a walkway of blood, which we will talk about here in a few minutes. Here's a few pictures to help you understand how complicated a sacrificial offering was. Okay, the next picture is the wash basin. The priests had to be clean to perform the sacrifices. They had to have both their hands and their feet washed, and this would have a bronze layer on the outside. And there, as you see, there's several spigots because we sometimes think of 1 or 2 people. This was like going on all day long. They would do hundreds in a day, sacrifices, not just a few. So they were very busy all day. Okay, the next one is the place of slaughter. Now, this one you can see the hooks, the little C hooks. That was, the hooks were, the animal's head would be placed in that C hook, and then they would slit their throat when they would do it, and then it would catch the blood down there. Now, it was important that when an animal was killed that it would be calmed down. They wanted it nice and calm. Sometimes they would pet it, keep it calm, because if an animal was killed and it was upset, it would taint the blood. And so some sacrifices that were done were not acceptable. The priest would tell them if it was acceptable or not before the Lord. Sometimes something would have gone wrong, and they said that it wouldn't have. Okay, I want you to notice there's different tables. There's those little white things. Those are the tables. They had different size tables for different size animals. And in in this area, they would have had hundreds of animals sacrificed day to day and year to year. And around the area, there's doorways. You can't see too many from here, but there would have been doorways, and that would have been for the bakery. They had a ceremonial bath area, which was huge, and they kept lambs for the slaughter in that area, and also they stored water in that area. So they had different areas back in there, and this would be in the outer court area. Okay, now the hooks for slaughter. And that's the white things. This is a close-up. As you can see, there's several different hooks on it. It's for different size animals. They would take the animals and they would hang them up by the hoofs to be carved and prepared for the sacrifice. The flesh would be delivered to the altar, and if it was not properly prepared, it would not be acceptable, and all parts of the animals were used. Remember that the animal's blood did not in and of itself remove the sin, that only God can forgive sin. Amen. Okay, and now we're going to do a view of a burnt offering altar. Yes, this is a long distance view where you can see there was ramps that they would walk up, and they would burn incense and animals there. And then we have a close-up of it so you can see it a little better. Next one. Yeah, this is a close-up of it. And they would have that. You can see the different things, and it was all bronze. It's described in the Bible in great detail on how it was built. They even had a fat burnt offering, and incense would be burned. And, you know, the Bible talks about a sweet smell before the Lord, sweet odor. Okay, we're going to begin our ceremony. First off, each one of our representatives are going to take off their coat and give the coats to each other. They're going to switch coats. And the reason they do this is that the coat stands for who you are and all that you are. It's your authority, just like Pastor Steve works out at the prison in his uniform and his badge. It shows his authority. It would be the same for someone in service or a police officer. Their uniforms and their badges, it's a representative of who they are. And so this is representative of who they are. Now the next step would be, by doing this, they're saying, I'm giving myself to you. So they're giving themselves to each other because they've all agreed on this. Now, next they're supposed to take each other's weapons, belt weapons, but I couldn't figure out a way to make a belt weapon, so they're just going to exchange weapons. And depending on what they did for a living, would be what they might exchange. Might have been swords, might have been hatchets. It just depends on what their walk in life was. But that was that they were giving of their strength. And this also means your enemies are my enemies. And even if I die, I stand with you. Okay, you two can sit down for a minute. We're going to get ready to sacrifice a lamb. And if any of the little kids would be upset by this, it's just a stuffed lamb. But I've had little kids in classes get upset over less than this. So I'm just warning you, if you think your kids won't like it, you might want to. And it is a cute little lamb that we have here. We tried to make it cute anyway. Oh, hold on, I forgot my sacrificial knife. Got to have that. And I was not able to find out exactly, and obviously it wouldn't be exactly like this, because in reality, when they did theirs, I'm sure they would still have cut the head off, but because of the little kids and the lambs are so cute, I don't want to cut their heads off. So anyway, if you will hold this, I will try to sacrifice this lamb. Hopefully it works. Make sure he's all. I tried to make it so you could see it better, because last time I did it, some people couldn't see it, and that's the whole point of sacrifice, is be able to see it. Okay, let's see here. Yeah, it's going to do it this time. And as you can see, the blood would flow, and they caught it in a dish for a reason. And so this is our lamb, and this lamb is just so you kids know, it's ketchup. My kids in class asked me, was I going to use a real lamb, and was I going to use real blood? And I said, no, we'll just use ketchup. So anyway, we have our lamb sacrifice now. I'll be right back. I'm supposed to take that with me. And it would have been very messy and bloody, actually. It really would have been. Okay. Now, the next thing they would do, it's called the walk of blood. And that's going to be over here now. what I did was just to try and show this a little. This is not, you'll have to excuse this lamb doesn't look too great, because if you've never taken a stuffed lamb and tried to cut it in half, it's hard. And I wanted to leave the head on, so he came out kind of weird shaped. It was supposed to be split down the middle without the head, but again, because of the children, I did it a little different. So I want you guys to walk through and do figure eights. Do a figure eight, and then when you do it the second time, you both stop in the middle. And I will tell you why. So, and this would have been all bloody. They would have been walking through the blood. If you need to scoot the lambs a little bit, you can to make it work a little better. Now, the walk of blood. When you're ready, guys, whenever you're ready. Okay, they would walk through the path of blood between the two halves twice, and they would do a figure eight. They would stop together in the middle, and I will say what you would have said. They would have said, even as this animal has died, I will stand with you even in the midst of death. Standing in the blood, I make promises I can never break. And the promises are made by each one, the blessing of covenant. And each representative would swear by God to keep his promises, whatever promises they would make. Would you guys move that lamb down for us right now so they can get ready for the next part? Okay, and the next part, you guys can come over here and we can just do that over here. Okay, after that, this was very involved. If you want to, you can set your weapons down maybe on your chairs for now. The next thing that would have happened would be the promises would be whatever they decided to say to each other as a promise. And the thing is, when they did this, they would say the blessings, and then each representative swears by God to keep his promises, making the third party a witness to the covenant. Okay, now the next thing is the cutting of flesh. You guys do the best. Do the best you can. So, okay, and the cutting of flesh, they would either cut the wrist or the hand. You've seen it on TV. And then the lifeblood of the family is being shed when they do that. Then the hands would have been left. You can, that's fine. Now we can just, okay. Raise your wrist up in the air. And together, guys, together. You're buds now. Remember. Okay, the hand is lifted up as lift up your hands. The hand is lifted up as the oath is swollen. You're supposed to have your hands together. Yeah, like that. Okay, with blood would have been running down their arms, and it says to keep the terms of the covenant, and it would have been so help me God. Okay, now you can sit down. Now, the next thing that would have resulted from cutting their hands or their wrists would have been that they would have created a scar that would not go away. And this was a sign that they were absolutely one. The next thing that would happen would be a name change. The way I look at this is I remember when I was young that they told me my maiden name is Kincaid, but originally I was told that there was Kins and then Cadens. And so the Kenneth of Cadens got together and became Kincaid. And one was, I believe, a farmer, and the other was a fighter, like a warrior. And then we have a family shield, and on it there's like a farming tool and a sword. So anyway, the name change, the testimony forever that we are one family and our names are one. And that would have been next. And they would have become friends. And to be a friend, a covenant must have been made. Hold on 1 minute. I told them that I would give them this so they could clean up before I forget. There, guys. Okay. Proverbs 18:24. There is a friend that sticks closer than a brother. A relationship has been born. And Brother Tom had to help me last time. Hesed. Did I say it right? Hasid. Okay. It cannot be properly translated. The Jews say it can't properly translate it. The best we have is loving kindness, grace, steadfast love, mercy, goodness, faithfulness, devotion, favor, and strength. The bond of the relationship, all that has been done in one word, is hesed. I guess that says that. Okay, the legal name is remember, that these two words are nothing without covenant. Remember, I hold you in my mind. Psalms 103:4. Who redeemed my life from destruction, who crowned thee with loving kindness and tender mercies. I crown you, you are ever before me. I live in constant reality of the bond between us. It is as if I am at this moment standing in the blood swearing. I am. I never I did or I will in the future, but it's always now. I am always plotting, planning ways to bless you and surprise you as I keep the covenant terms. God does this for us every day. We don't always think about it. God's constantly thinking about it. I'll say he's plotting, planning ways to bless us and surprise us, keeping the covenant terms. Isn't that amazing? I mean, it really is. Okay, the covenant is an action. It's always action. Knock and I'll open, seek and you'll find, ask and you'll receive, and it's a now thing. However, it has to be received by faith because it's a benefit. Psalms 105:2-4. Sing unto him, sing psalms unto him. Talk of his wondrous works. Glory to his holy name. Let the heart of them rejoice that seek the Lord. Seek the Lord and his strength. Seek his face evermore. The covenant meal would have been the grand finale. The leaders are gathered together. And it said for sure that there would have been a cup of wine and bread, and I guess that there would be cheese and grapes because those would have been available back then. Now, if you've ever done any study on wine, and wine can be a subject that you can get some heavy discussion on sometimes. But a new wine could have been just fresh grape juice made. And then there was also fermented wine. But anyway, they would have had wine and bread and cheese and grapes that are ours anyway. And they would drink, and they would say, drink my life's blood as I drink your life's blood. So if you guys want, you can drink that. I see you fulfilling all the terms of the covenant as I fulfill your life. And then I went ahead and John 6:51, I am the living bread which came down from heaven. If any man eat of this bread, he shall live forever. And the bread that I give is my flesh, which I will give for the life of the world. Okay, now this is the part they love. They get to each take a piece of bread and feed each other. I believe you could just rip it if you wanted to, guys. Piece of bread. They would feed each other bread as a final statement. And that statement is, take me all that I am, eat of me, I am yours. So you guys go ahead and feed each other. I know they want to see that. Okay. In the new covenant, God asked Jesus to be our sacrificial lamb. Okay, we have another picture for you, and it is the holy place. Outside the Holy of Holies, this is where the priests would have offered worship. They would have done service unto the Lord. They would maintain the gold lamppost and the bread table. And this is the veil you see here would have been on the outer part. It wouldn't have been into the Holy of Holies, but right outside of it. The next thing we're going to show you is the Ark of the Covenant. And I have seen many different pictures, but this is one. And on the Ark of the Covenant, it would contain the 10 Commandments, Moses' staff, and then there's debate on some of the other things that might have been in it. But point being is that in the middle, where the cherub's wings meet, right down below, that would have been called the mercy seat area. And on the day, once a year, on the Day of Atonement, the high priest offered the blood sacrifice for the nation's sins, and it would have been placed on the mercy seat. Okay, next picture is Jesus dies on the cross. And I want you to note, look at those crosses, what they did in this particular, which I thought was interesting, different from what we normally see. They just used the base of a tree, and then they would bring the crossbar. And they would put them, which kind of made more, in some ways made sense that they might have done that. Don't necessarily say that's the way they did it, but I could see why that might have worked that way. But anyway, Jesus established a new covenant between God and man. Jesus was without sin. His blood could truly remove the sins of all who put their faith in him. Jesus' sacrifice would never have to be repeated. It is good for all eternity. Okay, and the next picture we're going to show you is where the veil is torn. Those curtains, and I don't know if you knew, if those curtains were 60 foot tall from the ceiling to the floor. They would have been, they were woven on a loom. They were different from the curtains that were for the outer court area. And when these curtains torn, which they tore from the top to the bottom, which actually probably would have been harder than had it done the other way. But anyway, when these curtains torn, it was symbolic of the separation between God and man no longer existing. Now we have direct access to God because of Jesus loving us enough to die for us. Okay, the new covenant. God is forever bound to Abraham and his seed. Christ has redeemed us from the curse of the law, being made a curse for us. For it is written, "Cursed is everyone that hangeth on a tree," that the blessings of Abraham might come unto the Gentiles through Jesus Christ, that we might receive the promise of the Spirit through faith in Galatians 3:13 and 14. And if you be Christ, then you're Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. Galatians 3:29. This is the covenant that I will make with them after those days, saith the Lord. And I love this part. I will put my law into their hearts, and in their minds will I write them, and their sins and iniquity will I remember no more. Hebrews 10:16 and 17. That's one to get really excited about. And when he had given thanks, he brake it and said, "This is my body, which is broken for you. This do in remembrance of me. Take and eat." 1 Corinthians 11:24, which we hear that for communion. And he took the cup and gave thanks and gave it to them, saying, "Drink ye all of it, for this is my blood of the New Testament, which is shed for many for the remission of sins." Matthew 26, verses 27-28. The New Testament is the copy of our blood covenant with God as joint heirs with Jesus. 2 Corinthians 12:9, "But he said unto me, my grace, my favor, and loving kindness and mercy are enough for you. That is, it is sufficient against any danger and to enable you to bear the trouble manfully. For my strength and power are made perfect, fulfilled and completed, and show themselves most effective in your weakness. Therefore, I will all the more gladly glory in my weakness and infirmities, that the strength and the power of Christ, the Messiah, may rest, yes, may pitch a tent over and dwell upon me. I love that scripture. It is so good. That is out of the Amplified Bible. That is one good scripture. Prayer is searching the covenant for the answer and receiving it by faith in the blood that made it so. Then putting God the Father in remembrance of his covenant. Psalms 98:34, my covenant will I not break, nor alter the thing that's gone out of my lips. Psalm 98:35-37, once I have sworn by my holiness that I will not lie unto David. His seed shall endure forever, and his throne as the sun before me. It shall be established forever as the moon and as a faithful witness in heaven. Selah. Every time you see the sun and the moon, we should be remembered of our established covenant with God. God's love is in the details, and the whole point of this was things were so complicated when they had to cut the covenants back then compared to when Jesus did on the cross, and we're in the period of grace, and we can go before the throne of God, and we don't have to go to a high priest who, you'd have to go through and tell things, and you would have to get the money to do this and that. We have the privilege of just going before God when our heart desires, and he's so willing to have that fellowship with us. So the whole point of that was me comparing the Old Testament, how complicated it was compared to the New Testament, and how wonderful it is. And I got my information out of the Unger's Bible Dictionary, Kenneth Copeland Reference Bible, the Illumina Gold, and Dake's Annotated Reference Bible. And that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed it.